It was a freezing December night in rural Nebraska when I pulled into the gravel parking lot of the 24-hour gas station where I worked. The snow was coming down hard, blanketing the ground in a thick layer of white. I was on the overnight shift again, 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., a schedule I'd been stuck with for the past 6 months. I hated this job, but in a town of barely 2,000 people, options were slim. Plus, the night shift fit my chaotic personal life better. So I stuck with it, even though I dragged myself into work every night exhausted and miserable. I parked my beat-up Ford pickup next to the only other car in the lot, a rusty sedan belonging to my coworker, Jake. Inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed loudly, casting an eerie glow over the empty store. Jake was leaning against the counter, scrolling through his phone. "Quiet night," he said as I walked in. "Just you and the snow." He handed me the keys and left a few minutes later, leaving me alone for the rest of the night. The manager had left a list of tasks on the counter: restocking the coolers, cleaning the coffee machines, and checking the inventory in the back room. It wasn't much, maybe an hour's worth of work, but I decided to put it off. I wasn't in the mood to do anything but sit behind the counter and scroll through my phone. The snowstorm outside meant fewer customers, so I figured I could coast through the shift without much trouble. Around midnight, I heard the crunch of tires on snow. I looked up and saw an old, beat-up SUV pull up to one of the gas pumps. The headlights flickered, and the engine sputtered before shutting off. I didn't think much of it. People still needed gas, even in a snowstorm, so I went back to my phone. About 10 minutes later, I glanced outside again. The SUV was still there, parked by the pump, but there was no sign of the driver. The headlights were off, and the windows were fogged up. No one was pumping gas. No one was even moving inside the car. I stood up and walked closer to the window, peering out into the storm. The snow was coming down harder now, and the wind was howling. It was 15 degrees outside, way too cold for someone to just sit in their car with the engine off. I felt a pang of concern. What if they were hurt or stranded? I grabbed my coat and stepped outside, the cold biting at my face as I hurried over to the SUV. "Hello?" I called out, knocking on the driver's side window. "You okay in there?" No response. I cupped my hands around my face and pressed them against the glass, trying to see inside. The interior was dark, but as far as I could tell, the car was empty. No driver, no passengers. Just an abandoned SUV in the middle of a snowstorm. Confused, I stepped back and looked around. That's when I noticed the footprints. They led from the driver's side of the SUV toward the side of the building, disappearing around the corner. My heart started to race. Whoever had been in that car was now somewhere near the gas station, and I had no idea what they wanted. I hurried back inside, my hands trembling as I locked the door behind me. I stood by the counter, trying to calm myself down, when I heard a loud thud from the back room. My stomach dropped. I turned around slowly, my eyes scanning the store. Everything looked normal, but then I noticed the puddles of water on the floor near the back room. Melted snow. Someone had been inside. I grabbed the store phone and dialed 911, my voice shaking as I whispered, "I need help. There's someone in my store." The dispatcher assured me the police were on their way, but those 10 minutes felt like an eternity. I stood frozen behind the counter, my eyes glued to the doorway of the back room. I didn't hear anything else, no footsteps, no voices, but the silence was almost worse. It felt like whoever was back there was waiting, watching. When the police finally arrived, I pointed them toward the back room. They searched the area thoroughly, but there was no one there. The only evidence was the wet footprints leading to the back door and fresh tracks in the snow outside, disappearing into the vast, empty field behind the gas station. The officers followed the tracks for a while, but the storm made it impossible to see more than a few feet ahead. They eventually gave up, telling me they'd come back in the morning to continue the search. The SUV was towed away, but the police couldn't find any record of it in their system. No registration, no owner. It was like the vehicle, and the man who'd been driving it, had appeared out of thin air. To this day, I have no idea who he was or what he wanted. The police never found him, and the case went cold. Every time I drive past that gas station, especially on snowy nights, I can't help but think about that man, and the chilling feeling of knowing he was just a few feet away from me, hidden in the dark. I used to work as a night shift security guard at a small warehouse in downtown Portland, Oregon. The job wasn't glamorous, but it paid $18 an hour, which was way better than most gigs in the area. The warehouse wasn't huge, maybe about 10,000 square feet, but it stored high-end electronics like drones, smart home systems, and rare computer parts. Because of the pricey inventory, the place had to be under 24/7 surveillance. My job was pretty straightforward: watch the security cameras, do hourly patrols, and occasionally fill out incident reports. Most nights were dead quiet, but this one was different. It was a Thursday night in late October, and the weather was brutal. Rain poured down in sheets, and the occasional crack of thunder made the whole building feel like it was shaking. Honestly, I didn't mind nights like this. The storm meant fewer people out and about, which made me feel a little more at ease. I clocked in at 10:30 p.m., chatted with the day shift guys as they left, and settled into the security office. The warehouse was eerily quiet, save for the rhythmic drumming of rain on the metal roof. Around 12:30 a.m., I decided to take a break from staring at the monitors and do my usual patrol. I grabbed my flashlight and started walking through the aisles, checking for anything out of the ordinary. The storage area was at the far end of the building, about 150 feet from the security office. As I made my way back, I heard a soft beep coming from the office. It was the alarm system. A latch sensor on the back door had been triggered. I hurried back to the office and pulled up the live camera feed for the back door. The screen showed nothing but an empty alleyway, dimly lit by a flickering streetlight. No one was there. I figured it might have been a false alarm caused by the storm, but protocol required me to check it out in person. I grabbed my raincoat, disabled the alarm, and opened the back door. The alley was deserted, just as the camera had shown. The door itself seemed fine, no signs of forced entry or damage. I tested the latch a few times, and it worked perfectly. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I locked the door, reset the alarm, and headed back to the office to file a report. About 10 minutes later, as I was typing up the details, a loud thud echoed through the warehouse. My heart skipped a beat. I jumped up from my chair and peered down the hallway, trying to pinpoint where the sound had come from. The rain was still pounding on the roof, making it hard to hear anything else. I grabbed my flashlight and cautiously stepped out of the office. The warehouse was dimly lit, with long shadows stretching across the aisles. I walked slowly, scanning the shelves for any fallen boxes or signs of disturbance. As I approached the front of the building, the sound of the rain grew louder. That's when I saw it. The front door was wide open, and a small puddle of water had formed just inside the entrance. My stomach dropped. Someone had gotten in. I bolted back to the security office, locked the door behind me, and hit the emergency button to alert the police. As I waited, I heard more thuds coming from somewhere inside the warehouse. My hands were shaking as I gripped the phone, ready to call 911 if things escalated. The police arrived about 10 minutes later. I met them at the front door and explained what had happened. 2 officers went inside to search the building, while I stayed with a third to give my statement. A few minutes later, the officers emerged with a man in handcuffs. He was in his mid-30s, with wild eyes and disheveled hair. They found him hiding behind a stack of boxes in the storage area, clutching a hammer. As they led him past me, he locked eyes with me and gave me this cold, empty stare that sent chills down my spine. I'll never forget it. The police later told me the guy was high on meth and had no clear motive for breaking in. He'd used the hammer to force open the front door, but thankfully, he hadn't gotten far before they caught him. They couldn't say what he'd planned to do, but given his state, it could have been bad. Really bad. I quit the job a week later. The warehouse was just too creepy after that, especially on rainy nights. Even now, whenever I hear thunder or the sound of heavy rain, I think about that night and how close I came to something truly terrifying. It's a reminder that sometimes the quietest places can hide the darkest dangers. I work remotely for a cybersecurity firm, which sounds way cooler than it actually is. My job involves monitoring lines of code overnight, from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., to identify potential threats. It's mind-numbingly tedious, and the graveyard shift makes it even harder to stay awake. A few weeks ago, during one of those endless nights, something happened that still gives me chills. It was around 2:30 a.m., and I was fighting to keep my eyes open. I'd been scrolling through files for hours, my brain foggy from the monotony. To break the monotony, I decided to order some food. My only option at that hour was Taco Bell, so I placed an order through Uber Eats and got up to grab a drink from the kitchen. As I walked through the house, the faint glow of the hallway light guiding me, I noticed the sound of rain pounding against the windows. I hadn't realized it was storming until then. The rain was coming down hard, and I immediately felt guilty for making someone deliver food in such awful weather. I checked my phone and saw that the order had already been picked up. The delivery driver's car was making its way across town, and I watched the little icon on the Uber Eats map as it moved closer to my neighborhood. When the driver was about a minute away, I headed to the front door, wanting to make the exchange quick so they could get out of the rain. I stood there, holding the door open, staring down the street where the car should have appeared. But after 5 minutes, there was no sign of them. I checked my phone again. The map showed the driver's car just around the corner, near the turn onto my street. I peered outside, but I didn't see any headlights or movement. My first thought was that they might have had trouble finding the house or reading the address numbers in the rain. I tried calling the driver, but after a few rings, they rejected the call. I tried again, but no answer. By this point, I was starting to feel uneasy. I waited another 5 minutes, then tried calling one more time. This time they answered. "Hey, are you close? Do you need help finding the house?" I asked, but all I heard on the other end was the sound of heavy rain and static. No voice, no response, just the eerie crackle of the storm. After a few seconds, I hung up, my stomach twisting with unease. I checked the map again. The driver's car was now shown right outside my house. I looked out the window, but there was no car in sight. No headlights, no movement, nothing. The realization that someone was out there, walking around in the rain without a visible vehicle, sent a chill down my spine. I closed the door and locked it, my heart pounding. I swear, I only made it a few steps down the hallway when a loud knock echoed through the house. I froze, then crept back to the door and looked through the peephole. A man in a gray hoodie was pacing on my porch, his head darting around like he was checking for witnesses. "Uber Eats delivery," he shouted, but I didn't see a food bag anywhere. My gut told me something was wrong. I stayed silent, not making a sound. The man grew more agitated, knocking harder and calling out several more times. Then suddenly he pressed himself against the door, blocking my view through the peephole. I heard a faint scraping sound, like something sharp dragging against the wood. Before I could process what was happening, he darted to the side of my house and disappeared into the rain. I called the police immediately, but by the time they arrived, the man was long gone. They told me the Uber Eats account he'd used was a scam, and there was no way to track him. For the next couple of days, I tried to shake off the incident, telling myself it was just a prank or a misunderstanding. But then I noticed something on my front door, a small, faint scratch in the shape of an X. It wasn't obvious, it was more like a hidden mark, as if it was meant for someone else to see, not me. I painted over the mark, trying to erase whatever it might have signified, but the unease stayed with me. That night left me with a lingering sense of dread, especially knowing the man had been holding something sharp while he waited for me to open the door. Part of me is still convinced that wasn't the last I'll see of him.